minus q over n is very small, and therefore there is very little room for social networks to allocate resources. On the other hand, if there is an enormous amount of rationing, q over n is very small, well then people have very little vouchers to offer because there are very little vouchers in the first place, and again, it won't be very useful to use the social network. Okay. Then the government, which is a little bit cynical here, taking into account this second stage, must recalculate how many vouchers must be issued in the first stage, right? Because more of them are going to be used due to the social network, and therefore this equation allows the government to compute Q, to compute the number of vouchers to be issued. Okay, so you can prove that there is a decreasing relationship between Q and the intensity of the social network pi, because when the social network is more dense, then you issue less vouchers because more vouchers are going to be used. You can prove that when P bar goes up, again, there's less rationing, you can issue more vouchers. And you can also show that the slope of this relationship between the intensity of the network and the number of vouchers goes up with P bar. Okay, so that means that the number of vouchers is less sensitive to the intensity of the social network when there is less rationing. Okay, and when there is zero rationing, everybody buys whatever they want in the first stage, and so you issue n vouchers no matter what, and the social network plays no role. Okay, so this is the second stage of the game. I exchange my vouchers with somebody else whom I meet, but I need not meet somebody. I may meet nobody, in which case I'm stuck. Well, then let me add an initial stage of the game where you can decide about how many friends you have. Okay, you can decide to invite the director of the conservatory. So ex ante, people invest in their own pi, their own network intensity, at a cost C of pi, which has the usual properties, convex, increasing. And therefore, ex ante, I'm going to decide on the intensity of my network by equating the marginal cost of pi with the marginal utility of pi. Okay, I'm going to assume that C, that's doesn't matter. I'm going to assume that you like to have friends. So even though this played no role in exchanging vouchers, you would like to have some friends. And there is an optimal size of your network in the absence of any economic role for the network. I would like to meet the people whom I like. Okay, but this natural network is denoted by pi 0. And the margin and C prime of pi 0 is equal to 0. Okay, so if markets are regulated, then I'm going to go beyond this. I'm going to go to the point where C prime is equal to the marginal utility of pi, and therefore I am going to have dinner with people whom I don't like. Okay, because they are useful to me. I wrote this paper because I realized I was seeing plenty of people I didn't like, and I asked myself, why is it the case? So then we have to compute the marginal utility of having a larger network. Okay, so I'm not going to go through these derivations, but equation 4 tells you how many goods you can be expected to consume as a function of pi. Okay, so if I meet somebody, I can consume more goods, but this is more likely to be useful if there is rationing, but not too much rationing, as I explained to you. And so, and so the average utility of consuming one good is V, which is the maximum possible utility minus P bar, the price divided by 2, okay? And this is multiplied by n of pi, which is the number of goods that I get to consume as a function of the intensity of my network. Therefore, my utility is given by equation 5, and the first order condition is given by this equation 6. So, because of what I already explained, this is a non-monotonic relationship between Q and pi, okay? So in North Korea, assuming that you cannot buy anything in North Korea, you are only going to meet people whom you like, okay? And in, I don't know, Mile's Argentina or whatever is the most flexible country on earth, that's true also. You only meet people whom you like, okay? But in France, you spend plenty of time with people whom you dislike. There is this sort of ham-shaped relationship between between the degree of rationing and C prime of pi, and also between Q and pi. Okay. So putting all this together, then I get an equilibrium, which is determined by this the intersection between, okay, this is interesting, but let me start with the not interesting. So there are these two schedules that intersect. One is this ham-shaped PP curve, which tells you how people set pi as a function of the number of vouchers, okay, Q. And then there is this decreasing relationship, which tells you how many vouchers the government is going to issue as a function of the intensity of the social network. And this determines the equilibrium, okay? Perfect. Okay, very good. We are done with this. Okay. And then, of course, in this economy, this networking is a zero-sum game. You know, I'm stealing opportunities for the music conservatory from other people because, by assumption, supply is inelastic. But okay. And so the social optimum is C prime of pi equals 0. Pi equals pi 0. Okay, people suboptimally talk to too many people. Okay. And of course, so far, I have not given you any good reason for why the economy should be regulated. The social optimum value of P bar is, of course, P star, right? There is no market failure here. So far, the government is assumed to be a little bit stupid in some sense. So this brings to me the next question, you know, since it's not a good idea to regulate markets, who would vote for regulating markets? So I'm going to assume that I'm going to rule out, you know, a full set of fiscal instruments, which is, of course, a much better idea for redistribution than rationing. But let's assume, you know, you cannot do that. And I'm going to assume that people differ by their endowments. 10 minutes? Okay, I think I will survive. Yes. So people differ by their endowments, so there are rich people and poor people. And then I'm going to assume that some people are nicer than others, are more popular than others, so they also differ by their access to networks, okay? Or it could be inherited from their parents, okay? Like Gabriel Attal, our prime minister, who was by birth participated in a number of important social networks of the upper classes, different ones. He was at the intersection. So let me assume that person J has an endowment, theta J X over n. So I own a fraction theta j of the total supply of goods in this economy. Okay. So that determines my income, and then I can substitute this into my utility. And given that everybody has access to the social network, I know that the fraction of goods that I'm going to consume in general equilibrium is determined by the supply. So it does not depend on the social network. Okay, and so basically pi only appears through the last term, C of pi, which is pure loss, pure dissipation. Okay, so that's not very interesting, but I have to go through this. Okay, and if I look at this formula, then I end up concluding that nobody wants to invest in the social network beyond pi 0. And second, if my endowment is greater than 1/2, this formula tells me that P bar equals P star is preferred. So if I'm rich enough, I am partisan of free markets. Okay, because here rationing plays a redistributive purpose by reducing the costs of goods. Okay, but if I'm rich enough, then I also sell those goods, so I have lots of them. So I don't want to reduce P bar. And if I am poor enough, then I vote for regulation to have, to reduce the prices of all those goods. Okay. So in the absence of a full set of fiscal instruments, regulation is a second best instrument to redistribute between rich and poor. The rich don't want regulation, the poor want regulation, and everybody only talks to the people whom they like, including the rich. Although sometimes the rich are parasited by people who want to be friends with them, but this is out of the model. Okay, so then we can have a political equilibrium. Okay. So I'm going to assume that people choose between two societies: a rigid society where the price P bar is equal to some PL, and a flexible society where it's equal to the market clearing price. Okay. And then even though this is your utility when you vote on flexibility and rigidity, if you expect rigidity to prevail, then even though it's a zero-sum game, you are going to invest in your own network to get better access to the goods. So basically, if the median voter is poorer than the mean, which is often the case, then theta m is less than 1/2. So the decisive voter would vote for rigidity. And then anticipating this, everybody will invest more in their social network in order to get better access to the rationing process. Okay. On the other hand, if theta m is greater than 1/2, then the median voter is rich enough, and the median voter will vote for flexibility, and then everybody will have a social network equals to pi 0. Okay? So that's the political equilibrium, and okay, and that's it. So I'm going to make these things more interesting by assuming that, in fact, your cost of acquiring the social network, Cj of pi j, is now individual specific. Some people have a lower cost to access the social network. So we have to recompute somehow the equilibrium value of Q, and then people, contrary to the preceding situation, different people consume different ranges of goods, because now people who have a better access to social networks consume more goods than those who have a lower access to social networks. This is given by this formula down there, which tells you how many goods you consume as a function of the intensity of your own social network pi sub j, which is endogenous, but we can work with the equilibrium value, with its equilibrium value. Okay, where rho again is this index of how many goods are allocated through the social networks. So I can substitute this into utility, and here the key point is the cross derivative between pi j of this u with respect to pi sub j, the intensity of my social network, and p bar, the regulated price. Okay, and so this cross derivative, it's obvious from this formula, is negative, which means that my marginal utility of deregulating is lower when my social network is more developed. So rationing is supported by two kinds of people with little financial capital, theta low, and people with high social capital, pi j high. Okay, so these are the lobbies against the market economy, if you want. So, so then we can cook a sort of numerical example. I'm not going to go into the details of this numerical example, but what do we learn from this? We have this equation 9 that tell you who is going to support rationing if rationing prevails. Okay, so basically, if I expect rationing to prevail, I have invested in my social network because I expect rationing to prevail, and if I have my social network pi j on the left-hand side is large enough compared to my wealth theta j in the right-hand side, then I'm going to support the social network. Okay. On the other hand, if people, so basically, okay. Now, on the other hand, if people expect flexibility to prevail, then they are all going to have the same social network pi 0. Nobody is going to do excess investment in social networks to access the ration goods, and therefore exposed, everybody has the same social network, right? And so exposed people will vote for rigidity only if their wealth is lower than 1/2, regardless of social networks. Okay, so basically, who is going to support the rigid society depends on expectations. If people expect the rigid society to prevail, then everybody invests in social networks ex ante. There is an inequality in this. The people who have better access to social networks are more likely to support the rigid society. Okay. So this leads me to the most important picture, which is this one. On the horizontal axis, you have theta j, okay, your wealth, your endowment, and on the vertical axis, you have pi j, your social network. Okay. Now, if people expect flexibility, then the limit between the regions of the people who support flexibility versus rigidity is given by this vertical line at 0.5. Everybody on the right will support flexibility, and everybody on the left will support rigidity. If people expect rigidity, then the frontier is this upward sloping line here, which tells you that, if I am richer, I am more likely to support flexibility, but if my social network goes up by enough, I will still support rigidity. So this line is upward sloping. Okay? And then we have 4 groups, A, B, C, and D. So basically, D are people who will always support flexibility no matter what, okay? And B are people who will always support rigidity no matter what, okay? Then C, who are these guys? Well, if rigidity is expected to prevail, then expose they will support rigidity because they are relatively wealthy, but they have a very developed social network. So they will benefit from rigidity, but in order for this to be the case, it means that they have expected rigidity to prevail. Otherwise, they would not have invested so much in their social network. Okay, so the C people are people who lead to self-reinforcing mechanisms. If they expect rigidity, they invest a lot in their social network and they vote for rigidity. If they expect flexibility, they don't invest in their social network and they vote for flexibility. The A people are pushing into the direction of having only one equilibrium. The A people, they are a bit poor, but not that poor, and they are not liked, so they don't have a big social network, okay? So basically, if rigidity is expected to prevail, then they don't invest in their social network, they are below 1/2, they vote for rigidity. But if flexibility is expected to prevail, they are at a disadvantage in a rigid world because we sorry, what am I saying here? If I got the other one. If rigidity, if rigidity is expected to prevail, they vote for rigidity. If flexibility is expected to prevail, they vote for flexibility. If flexibility is supposed to prevail, they vote for rigidity, right? And if rigidity is supposed to prevail, they vote for flexibility because they don't have friends. And so they are at a disadvantage compared to those who have friends. So exactly. So they vote against the status quo, whereas they vote against the expected equilibrium, whereas C votes in favor of the expected equilibrium. Exactly. Thank you. So therefore, this mechanism of endogenous investment, I'm done. This is the last slide, of endogenous investment in social networks, along with voting on regulation, can lead to a self-reinforcing mechanism by which people expect rigidity, and rigidity creates its own support of a mass of people who have invested a lot in social networks ex ante. They are good at it, and exposed, they support rigidity. Okay. For this, it must be that group C, the group that leads to the self-reinforcing mechanism, is bigger than group A, which tends to destroy the self-reinforcing mechanism. So if A is smaller than C in terms of distribution of people, then we have multiple equilibria, and therefore rigidity is a self-reinforcing mechanism. Okay. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. We have very few minutes, but we have at least time for 2 or question or 3. I don't know.
Can we really say that this networking and exchange of values is really a zero-sum game if we take into account the opportunity cost? Because if we take into account that the people waste time in these activities, right? It will be a negative game type of game.
No, you are totally right. In total, it is a negative sum game, at least in this model. But once you have invested in a pie and what pie is frozen, the second stage game of exchanging through the social network is a zero-sum game. Okay, because in this economy there are only X goods to be produced, to be consumed. But you are right. If I take into account the complete welfare of the people, taking into account the investment cost, it's a negative sum game. But it's a zero-sum game in terms of the number of goods that are consumed. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for presenting for presenting us your model. More rigid societies tend to be more conservative. Can we conclude this from your model?
Well, if by conservative you mean right-wing, in this model, poor people are more likely to vote for rigidity because the kind of rigidity that I am analyzing here is price controls like social housing, etc. Okay. So the ideology of the rigid society is more like a left-wing ideology. We want a music conservatory to be accessible to the poor, and therefore we put a cap on its price. Okay, that's the reason why some people vote for this. But of course, we have rich people who are super well connected, and they also benefit from it. And they are part of the political support for this. Okay. So I don't know what conservative means. I mean, if you are in the Soviet Union in 1991, being a conservative means being a communist. You want to conserve the status quo.
I have a last question. in your the mechanism of rationing in your model, it's a purely public mechanism. I mean, vouchers but this kind of rationing is made by markets also in a way in which, for example, in certain parts of in your book about different type of markets, labor markets, you show that there are configurations in which labor markets themselves, not the government intervention, have rationing systems and rationing mechanisms that produces, for example, this kind of informal mechanisms to have friends is important, and informal networks are important. So this is not only the fault of the government. It's also in presence of rationing, you have those, and this is maybe an explanation of informality in a certain way. It's you go into the informal markets with informal mechanisms, and this is it.
That's correct. Now, if rationing comes from a microfounded microeconomic frictions, as in the efficiency wage literature, you cannot vote to eliminate it, right? So of course you would be in a world where all the phenomena associated with the rigid society, as I described here, would emerge. But my focus here is, the sort of political support for rigidity. So I'm assuming it's a collective choice here. I want to know who is in favor of this system. Okay, and so right. And then I should insist that I am not super happy about my assumption about vouchers, because you don't get a voucher to go to the conservatory. You have to stand in line, etc. So it's really a metaphorical device to analyze and to put this in mathematics in some sense.
Thank you very much, Gilles. I will give the floor to Andres, who is going to tell you.
Just to say thank you very much to be here today here in the university. We hope to see you tomorrow too at the Universidad de los Andes to have another exciting day of our conference and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you very much.